Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staton here, delighted to have been joined by Jeff Simmons to run through. There's so much to run through, Jeff. So many topics to get into tonight. We'll start with the Geno Smith contract news that emerged yesterday. We've since got some details on Smith's contract breakdown. What is your reaction to what you've seen in terms of the numbers and the fact that Geno Smith has a new 3-year deal?
Well, it's funny. Matthew Berry from NBC Sports was at the Combine and wrote an article yesterday on like 20 things he learned at the Combine. Literally, one of the things was something you always talked about. One of his little sentences was like, the Seahawks are considering not signing Geno and going with the rookie quarterback in the lock. And literally, as I put on Twitter, I saw Geno signing. So I was kind of getting excited about the idea that you've talked about for so long. Yesterday, I was waiting to see the final numbers. I didn't have much of an opinion. And I was pretty stunned when I saw it today. It is way lower than I thought it would be. It's still Geno Smith. It's still a lot of wait and see, but it's a lot lower than the franchise tag number. It's essentially a 2-year, $40 million deal, probably 2-year, $50 million deal. So there hasn't really been this mid-market for quarterbacks. It's been 30 to 35 million or 40 million. At least Daniel Jones just signed. I think it's going to actually be closer to 40 million. Geno, a lot of his deals built in incentives, and you're looking really at 2 years, 40 million. And you know what that is? Like, it's the modern day Matt Flynn contract. It's just estimated up to what the quarterback market is. The cap's gone up a ton since 2012. So I think the Seahawks are perfectly hedging their bets, and I think they're realizing Geno is kind of what we've been thinking the whole time. Like, if he's good and plays like he did the first 8 games of last year, then great. They'll pay him in incentives, and he'll get paid and if he's a 1-year wonder or flames out, we're hoping they address possible other quarterbacks, but it's built in. It looks like we haven't seen the exact cap hits yet, or whether how easily they can get out, but it looks like they can get out after a year and definitely after 2 years. He'd have to play his way into the 3rd year. So when all this media last night were like, oh, Geno Smith, $100 million, I read your piece right away. You were right on it. To me, I thought I was talking to one of the Seattle media members last night when I said I don't really get why everyone's reacting. I thought it'd be a 2-year, $60 million deal. That was the number I predicted, which I thought would have been kind of reasonable given the crazy quarterback market. Again, another thing you've talked about. 2 years and 40 or 50, that's a lot lower than I thought it'd come in. I think the Seahawks won this negotiation. I think it's something that you and me have really talked about. I don't think there was a market for Geno Smith. And I think that's why he signed before free agency. I think that's why he signed that deal.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the Seahawks have played this perfectly, Jeff, because there was people saying, pay Geno during the season, pay him before the combine and all of this. And what really needed to happen was Geno Smith's agents had to go to Indianapolis where all the other teams were. As we all know, this happens, this sort of tampering goes on. They had to establish what his market was. And lo and behold, a couple of days after the combines finished, they've got a deal. They knew what was on the table for Geno, and it wasn't 30 million. It wasn't 40 million. It wasn't anything like that. I suspect the Seahawks probably had this offer on the table before the combine. Geno's gone and found out if he could get anything better. There's nothing close to it. I'll take that deal. Thank you very much. And therefore, the Seahawks do win the deal. It sounds fantastic. Mike Florio's had a look at the numbers. He had this quote, which I thought was very interesting, Jeff, on his website earlier today. He says it's a 2-year, $50 million deal plus incentives. It all means the Seahawks could potentially move on after 1 season. They would owe $12 million for 2024. Possibly he would get that much or close to it on the open market, offsetting Seattle's obligations. So if the Seahawks wanted to move on in a year, if he signed somewhere else for, let's say, even something like $7 million, that would offset against the Seahawks. The Seahawks wouldn't owe him $12 million. They would owe him $5 million in that instance. In no way, shape, or form, Jeff, is this a bad deal. This is the ideal. Your way with words at time is perfect. It's the modern day Matt Flynn contract is a quote that I'm going to recite throughout the next few weeks, I think, with a proper credit to yourself for coming up with that. And that's what it feels like. And for me, Jeff, I don't know how you feel. It just keeps everything on the table. They have a quarterback for next season that if they had to play a game tomorrow, they wouldn't feel bad about. But at the same time, it doesn't rule anything out over the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, and that's the best part of this whole thing. Even when I saw last night, I was talking to one of the Seattle reporters who told me there wouldn't be a real like the 35 number looked like fluff to him. When I was talking about that, I thought the best point when I thought the number was that high was the optionality for the Seahawks at that. Now that we know what the real number, or at least what the actual contract looks like, nothing changes for them. And I saw you wrote that too. And especially now that you really see what the numbers are and how the contract breaks down. Florio is usually the best one at cutting through kind of the shit. And it leaves everything on the table. Like I saw a lot of people, Geno signed for $100 million. They're not going to draft a quarterback now. I think that's just reading it totally wrong. I think nothing changes. I think you're in the exact same spot, and it's a hedge. You're hedging yourself. We've talked about the Alex Smith situation so much as the ideal thing what they want to do, and there really hasn't been that mid-market quarterback contract. And Derek Carr's was a little higher, and they found a pretty good sweet spot for if Geno is for real, then they have a quarterback. They want to draft a quarterback. Geno's contract is not going to block that, and it's a great situation where if the guy comes in, he's better than Geno, you can get out after a year from the Matt Flynn situation. So every option is on the table. I think that's the best part of this. Just nothing changes for the draft. If they want to go defense, they can go defense. They have their quarterback. If they want to draft Hendon Hooker, if they want to draft Stetson Bennett, or if we're sitting there and we're looking at these guys at 5, and the way the draft's kind of shaken out, I haven't been playing with that mock draft simulator, and I'm sure we'll get into this. I just can't find a lot of scenarios where I'm not taking a quarterback unless you're comfortable with Jalen Carter. And I don't think we'll talk about this later, but there's a lot on the table for them. And like doing some of the mock simulators it's a much more interesting exercise now that we know kind of what their things are looking like going into free agency.
And I think this is perfect for them, Jeff. This is exactly what they want. They want all of the other teams to have this conversation as well. What are the Seahawks going to do? What are they thinking? Are they going to? I mean, I've just read Tom McShay's just published a mock draft. He's got them going defensive end at 5 and defensive end at 20. And there'll be some teams there wondering, are the Seahawks going to do that? There'll be other teams wondering, do we need to get ahead of the Seahawks to draft a quarterback? What are they going to do? Are they going to take one because of the structure of this deal? Teams like, whether it's worthwhile in the end or not, Jeff, teams like to create a mystery about what their intentions are. They don't want you to be an obvious team that's going to do this, that's going to do that. And there are some obvious teams at the top of the first round. Everybody kind of thinks the Cardinals are locked into Kyler Murray. They're going to take a defender there. The Colts have got to take a quarterback. The Seahawks have got this level of mystery there. And I think John Schneider likes that. I thought this was an interesting comment on the blog, and I wanted to put it to you, Jeff. And I wonder if you think there's maybe something in this or not. I don't know, actually. I'll put it to you. This was from Thomas on the blog yesterday. He says, I suspect this was a Carroll thing, the Geno Smith contract. John gets to draft a quarterback, but they re-sign Geno to compete now. I mean, whether you put it in exactly those terms, it does kind of suit all parties if they do that, because Pete Carroll has a quarterback. He's coming to the end of his career that he probably feels he can start with now. He's not going to have a new guy come in straight away, day one, and work with them. But if John Schneider, who's got a longer contract than Pete Carroll, his contract, I think, goes on to 2027. If he wants to make an investment with this rare pick at number 5, then he can do that as well. And nobody loses out. Kind of everybody wins in that aspect.
Yeah, in a way, I can see that being the case. Geno is not the typical Schneider quarterback. Schneider has preferred the more the toolsy. One of the first moves he made when he got to Seattle was trading for Charlie Whitehurst, who was just like a pure toolsy guy that just never transferred, really. The only reason I hold back on that is they've done this before. This is how they found Russell Wilson and Matt Flynn. And I just see them, if Geno wanted that $35 million a year, I think they would have let him walk, and I think they would have just focused on using this pick on a quarterback and probably re-signing Drew Lock. If they got Geno at their number, it works out really well for John because it lets the draft come to him rather than him having to chase something. And the way John operates in the past, he's always tried to kind of use hedges in a lot of the ways he does things. He's talked about his mistakes. I hope he's learned from them. But like the LJ Collier thing is the example of what he's gone the other way, where he's lost himself completely. Even the Eskridge thing, to a point, I get why they liked him, but they were so hyper-focused on getting that third receiver, they lost out on other better players. And And it happened with Collier, where they were good players on the board, but they needed that edge guy after they traded Frank Clark away. And they got stuck. So I think John, one of the things he's tried to learn from is even like when they drafted Bobby Wagner years ago, they signed Barrett Root. I don't know if people remember that, but it allowed him to go into the draft and just at least have something in there that gives him some sort of peace of mind. And so I don't think I can see Pete wanting Geno signed probably more than maybe John would, but I think this really fits John's MO and how he's done things in the past. And really where he's most comfortable is when he doesn't chase things, he lets things come to him.
Super chat's coming in. If you have a question for Jeff or if you just want to make a statement, please super chat away. David says, thanks for your work this week, Rob and Co. He's used the quote here, Jeff. Pay the iron price. I don't know if you're aware of this, but people have been calling for the Seahawks to trade up. And somebody mentioned the other day in a super chat that they demanded that the Seahawks pay the iron price to get their quarterback. So that's the quote of the week that people have been using. Matthew sent a super chat in. Matthew, thank you for that. No comment, but just the $9.99. Really appreciate it. Dan's got a question. He says, love the content. Thank you. And thank you for your super chat as well there, Dan. How does Will Anderson fit into our current scheme? Does he play opposite Nwosu? And what does that mean for Taylor and Maffei? Thank you for that, Dan. So go on then, Jeff. You get into that. I don't know if you've had a chance to really study Will Anderson yet or whatever. The Seahawks do obviously have some edge rushers. Personally, I would say that I think Will Anderson's character and talent probably means you can get away with taking him and sort of just adding him to that rotation and throwing him in there. And he could be someone who you view as a leader for the next, era of Seahawks football on your defense, much in the way that, Cam was. I think he's kind of got that similar personality. He wears 31 as well, so they're practically the same person. I think that's how he fits in that regard. What do you think in terms of that scheme fit and that fit for Will Anderson, who I don't think is going to be there at number 5, but if he was, what do you reckon?
I think it's almost the best fit for him. I think of the pure 4-3 DN, he's a little smaller, he's a little undersized. He's really built to play as that 3-4 outside linebacker where he can drop in coverage, he can play in space, and he can kind of use that speed and power. He's not like an explosive runner we saw with his split and with his 40 time, but he's more of a power rusher for his size. He's built really similarly to Khalil Mack, and he's been the 3-4 stand-up edge rusher in Oakland and Chicago and Vic Fangio defenses in the past. And they don't have the exact same game. Mack's a lot more ripped, but just schematically, he fits in like a glove. And you ask about Taylor and Maffei. Taylor, we saw what happened last year when he was an every down player in the first 8 games. He was basically at the point where he was unplayable. He's a one-dimensional player right now. So Darrell Taylor right now is going to be your third down rusher at most, because when we saw him play on rundowns in this defense, he was being targeted by other teams every week, and it took away from his pass rushing. So Maffei, on the other hand, Maffei's a second-round pass rusher, and he's not a guy who I project as like a frontline player. So I think he's going to be a really good rotational guy. He showed more against the run than I would have guessed last year. His pass rushing starts to come in at the end, but I think those are more rotational guys. Like edge rushers, sort of like quarterbacks. Like the good ones go in the top 10. You don't see a lot of guys come out of the second round. And Maffei going to the second round, that's sort of what you get. So I think if you have Anderson and Nwosu as your bookend, and remember, Nwosu's in the last year of his deal. So I think just from just like a team building, a position building, I think he fits in like a glove. Now, I'm with you. I don't think he's going to be there. The only thing I'm hearing, and again, you hear a lot of BS this time of year. I heard Arizona really likes Tyree Wilson. And those guys come from New England, their new GM, where they really emphasize traits and the freaky long arms. They drafted Chandler Jones back in the day. It might be BS. If you're making the first pick of a new regime, like how do you not take Will Anderson? He's a clean off the field from Bama. Like it's as clean of a pick as it gets. They got new head coach John Gannon, who had like that D line in Philly. So if they don't trade out, it's going to be one of those two guys, I'm guessing. And I don't know if this Tyree thing's bullshit, but I would take Will Anderson if I was Arizona.
Yeah, I think it's for first time GM making his first pick. If you can get Will Anderson, I think it's just a safe option. But then Jonathan Gannon doesn't run it. I mean, they had Vic Fangio working with them, but it's a slightly different scheme, isn't it? And maybe they'll just think, well, Wilson's a better fit for the scheme. And if he has a great pro day, look, with respect to Will Anderson, he was fine. You know, his combine was fine. He ran a 4.60 and a 1.61 10-yard split, but he didn't blow it up. You know, he didn't come in there and say, look at me, I'm, you know, an absolute freak of nature. So maybe if Tyree Wilson can be that with his incredible, I mean, he just looks like should be in a Marvel superhero with his frame. You can probably tell that I'm not a big Marvel guy because I don't really know what I'm talking. Very much out of my depth when I'm talking about stuff like that. But it's what he looks like, and I could I'd imagine Jeff and Daniel Jeremiah's talked about this, that maybe Wilson will jump ahead of Anderson as the time goes on. But Anderson's just got a character, and it's probably long gone now. Just type in Will Anderson interview. He did something with ESPN during the season. It's probably the best player interview I've ever seen. So I'd recommend people go and check that out. And Taker 610 says, if Mahomes and Rodgers can sit their first years, then Levis, Stroud, or Richardson can too. Let's go quarterback. Is Anthony Richardson Russell in a linebacker's body? I think they're very different players. I don't really see a lot of Russell Wilson and Anthony Richardson, but in terms of ability and ability to create, there's something there. So I wanted to get onto the combine, Jeff, and just wondered, you know, what's your takeaways from that? I'm not sure how much you watched of it. If there were sort of players to you that you thought that person's caught my eye, I've got a few names I can chuck your way. But what did you make of the week in Indianapolis?
I probably watched more of the and I love the combine in general because this is my process of how I like hearing what I don't care about them running as much. I can read about that. I like to hear just what they say about them. And other than the offensive line and running backs day, which I tuned in a little bit, I was glued to the TV for Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And like the quarterbacks you don't often see, like Bryce Young is usually what happens. And we're seeing lesser and lesser players work out. Like you did a great job covering how kind of a joke it's become in that sense. But there are some I know we've talked about it and you're right. Like there are a lack of blue chip players in the top 10, just like pure blue chip player outside of the quarterbacks. But like this draft has like some awesome position groups, like watching the corners, the tight ends, the edge rushers, and some of them weren't as freaky as I thought, but like the corners, the tight ends, and then the quarterbacks. Like when was the last time we got to see 4 quarterbacks in the top that might go in the top 5? I can't remember any draft like this. So watching them was thrilling. The receivers were pretty disappointing, but we sort of knew that already. And just like seeing the tight ends and see like what Darnell Washington did, how freaky he looked, and some of the other guys, and like it's a really good way to get to know this draft class. Julius Brents is a guy that you've been talking about on your blog for a while. Like seeing him run was really cool, and like in the groups that weren't very good. Like safety didn't look very good. Receiver Smith and Jigba looked pretty cool, but it's a pretty weak group overall. And it's a good year also that they don't need an offensive tackle. So a lot of things are playing in their strength, but it was just really fun to watch some of those exciting position groups because that second and third round looks really, really interesting to me.
Because I've seen a lot of people say, and it gets trotted out every year, Jeff, that it's the underwear Olympics. It's not a very important event. You can read too much into this. And there's definitely some of that involved. There is some hype that comes with the combine. But I think it does sort of break down exactly why certain position groups are strong. So we saw that with the tight ends. To see the sheer number of tight ends who ran a short shuttle as well as they did, you know, we've kind of like picked through, and the top players, and this is just a fact, the top tight ends in the NFL over the last decade have all run a fantastic 10-yard split and a short shuttle. So there's a trend there amongst all of the top players. And then when you look at this group, a whole bunch of them ran a great short shuttle and a great 10-yard split. So you can say, okay, the tape's good, but they've also got the profile of a top tight end in the NFL. So it matches up. So it's a good tight end group. With the offensive linemen, I mean, I was listening to I watched every second of it, and Doug Peterson was there, and they said, what's a strong position? And he went, offensive line's got a lot of depth. And I thought, that's interesting because I've not really thought about it that way. And then I've actually run it through the sort of explosive testing numbers today. And it's not something the Seahawks pay that much attention to anymore, but the league generally does. So far, Jeff, I've managed to find 19 explosive offensive linemen. In a typical year, I've been doing it since 2016, you would have 6 to 8 explosive offensive linemen. You've got 19 in this draft.
Crazy.
I mean, it goes to show there is that depth there of players who have the physical profile of a starting NFL lineman. And there'll be players that you can find in the middle rounds. And some of the guys, I mean, look, I've been calling him Addy. It's Adeboawore from Northwestern. I mean, the guy was 282 pounds, ran a 4.49. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable. The way that Richardson and Stroud, in particular, threw the football was a treat to watch. Darnell Washington running a 4.08 short shuttle at a 4.65 40 for a blocking tight end. And if you watch him on tape, he almost looks like a bit of a plodder at times. But you're thinking, well, where are these numbers from? It shows the kind of potential that he's got. I thought it was really interesting seeing some of the players that you kind of expected to do well excel, like Zay Flowers did everything pretty well. Jackson Smith and Jigba would not have run a good 40. That's why he didn't run one. But to see his agility testing, it shows that there is something there. You know, it's not a complete slouch. Darnell Wright was fantastic. Peter Skoronski is one of the most explosive offensive linemen to enter the league in years and will probably be a top 12 pick as a consequence of that. You just sort of watch through it and you think, Kalijah Kancey, not mention him. You know, there are some really interesting players available in this draft, Jeff. I'm not sure that you're going to get to 20, 38 and 53 and get a player who in 5 years' time we're talking about as, you know, one of the faces of the NFL. But what I think you might get in that range is a really good, solid core contributor who you feel really good about, who's got a chance to get a second contract. And sometimes it's all about that. I mean, this for me, the aim for the Seahawks should be in this draft, smash it out the park with number 5. Number 5 has to be a star for you.
Yeah.
If you can get a star at 5 and you can get good, solid contributors in the second and third round, then you'll be on the path to success.
Yeah, and that's where this draft is important because the Seahawks do have a tendency to kind of shoot for the moon, and they do chase a lot of like traits-driven players, or sometimes they go on the other way, and they don't often take just a good, solid football players. And at 20 and at 37 and 53, or maybe if they move down at some point from 20 and get another second or third round pick, I want to kind of see more of those kind of players, like the kind of players like Abraham Lucas last year. Like that was just a good football player. There was no reason they should have got him. Kenneth Walker, just like a good football player. I say the kind of guys Baltimore would draft. And like Brian Branch is like a guy who, I don't know if he fits Seattle at all. He's just a nickel, but just good football players. And yeah, they at 5, you have a chance that they're probably never going to have again in this regime, unless everything just falls apart. But you want to see that star player. You don't want to see them take Peter Skoronski at 5. You want to see them go for that star kind of quality. And then throughout the draft, there's just interesting guys. Like the centers are interesting, the couple guys that you've targeted on your blog. And I do think they need a center. And I think there's 2 that fit their sweet spots. And there's some interesting defensive linemen. And I think tight end is a much more of an option than other people might realize. They have no real tight end side beyond this year. And Will Dissly got hurt again. His last year of his contract, which is next year, is full of like this. It's funny money. He's not going to be on his 3rd year of his deal. So I don't know if Fant or Parkinson are the kind of guys you're going to sign for another deal. So I think there's a lot of different ways they can go. And that's why I've been playing with these scenarios on the simulators. And I don't love the simulators in general because I think that the ranges are all wrong. But like some of the decisions they're going to have to make are just really, really interesting because, again, all these spots, there are players that are just good, solid football players. And you look at this team now, they have some good skill positions, but they don't have a lot of like star players. They don't have a lot of people project as stars. Maybe DK might be the only one, but they need guys like that. Look what San Francisco was last year. Look what the Rams were when they won. Obviously, they need that middle ground. They need to beef up trenches. I think that's so important in this draft. But yeah, number 5, they need a guy who couldn't be that star because if not, it's hard to win. You don't see teams winning the Super Bowl without those kind of guys.
Agree, and I agree with your point about getting and like it doesn't have to be a trade specialist, you know, in round 2 and round 3. And there are players like I've been using the example of Byron Young at Alabama. You don't watch Byron Young. I didn't test brilliantly. You don't watch Byron Young and think, wow, I'm watching the next Aaron Donald. You watch Byron Young and you're thinking, I can imagine him playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Baltimore Ravens in a rainy November Sunday afternoon and getting the job done. You know, and it's not that he produces the game-winning sack, but what he does do is he keeps the opponents to 3 yards per carry instead of 5. Or he has that little bit of pressure, or he takes on that block and splits it, and he draws attention, Jeff. and Daryl Taylor gets free for a sack or something like that. It's that sort of contributor, and that's what he did at Alabama last year. It's somebody like that at 53 or in round 3 that can come in. The 2 centers, to me, it's if I don't know if you can do this. If you wanted to bet on somebody being a Seahawk, I think Luke Weipler or John Michael Schmitz, one of them is going to be a Seahawk. And I wonder if they will get to. It may even be at 38. I don't know. Centers generally tend to last, don't they, Jeff? I wonder whether they'll just go, do you know what? We're just going to take the one we like the most when we can get them and fill that hole. I've been thinking that they might go the veteran route with centers, but seeing these 2 test, and I don't know if you've seen it, Luke Weipler did a press conference, and he practically was saying to the Seahawks, come and get me. I've been studying the scheme. That I emulate myself after Brian Allen, the Rams center. I'm perfect for this. He runs a 4.53 short shuttle, which is exactly the same as Austin Blythe's. He's practically the same size in height, length, and arm length in terms of Austin Blythe. I mean, he is, and people may shudder at that thought and think, I don't want another Austin Blythe, but look, he was the guy who in the college football playoff semifinal was handling Jalen Carter. Yeah. And that will have not gone unnoticed, because I bet you the Seahawks are watching Jalen Carter in that game.
They were probably at that game.
So Luke Weipler had a good game there. And look, John Michael Schmitz, I thought, had a really good on-field session. Now, he's got a very similar short shuttle, which has been indicative for centers of this kind. He ran a 4.56, very similar to Weipler. He's not quite got the same dimensions, but they're similar. They've both got really good personalities that I think John Schneider will like. And I thought on-field, Schmitz looked very, very good at the combine. So he's another one in that you don't look at him and you're not wowed by him. But if you could get him at 38 or 53, I know some people are saying he could go in like the top 40. I'm not quite there with that. But, those are the kind of guys. There's a guard at LSU called Anthony Bradford, who's an absolute, I thought he looked like a gem, Jeff. And he's tested brilliantly. He was fantastic on him. 3rd, 4th round, go and get yourself an Anthony Bradford. I bet he'll be contributing for you in a couple of years. Or Emil Ekiyor at Alabama just gets the job done for Alabama. I thought he looked really good during drills. So I think that's what this draft is. It's lacking the wow, like Boy Mafe jumps a 40-inch vertical and he's got this. It's not got as many of those, but it's certainly got those meat and potatoes players that you can build a core team around. And whether or not you re-sign them or not, I don't know. You definitely want to avoid just drafting LJ Collier types, but
yes,
not everybody's going to be LJ Collier like that. I mean, the Steelers and the Ravens, as the example, are full of players that we're not great testers who've just become really solid 8-year pros because they just get in there, Jeff, and they're football players. They've played for big teams in college and they're just with it, and they get out there and they get the job done.
Yeah, and one of my favorite guys in the draft from the Seahawks perspective is Michael Mayer. And it wasn't an explosive tester at all. If you watch him run the 40, I don't think you're looking for that kind of athlete, but I think if you watch some of the tougher teams in the league, and it's not just offensive line and defensive line. If you have like a big physical tight end, and like you've seen what George Kittle's done in our division as a blocker, and you saw what Heath Miller did for Pittsburgh and Todd Heap, and I think if you want to become a tougher team, like a guy like Mayer, I think fits perfectly. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of situations where certainly at some spots, you definitely want good testers. You don't want to take the LJ Collier as like a 3% athlete or something. But you want a kind of a combination. Addy's the guy I came across first because I saw your interview with Jim Nagy and before the Senior Bowl, and I hadn't heard that name during the season. And watching him test was pretty wild. I can't believe anyone can move at that speed. And he was pretty good at the Senior Bowl. He had great highlights. So you're kind of trying to find that middle ground. But like Mayer is a great example of someone I think would be just a perfect fit at 20. I don't know if the Seahawks will take it, and I don't know if people will be excited. But like they need those kind of players that are going to make them tougher and bigger and stronger. And Darnell Washington, I think, would be a really interesting player, maybe at 37. But I don't know if he's going to make it the way he tested. Teams like the Bengals and the Bills might like him at the end of one. So I think there's just a lot of players. Like the center Whippler he's perfect fit for them. He is like, if you can get him to that 50 pick, that's just perfect. Drop him in, day one starter. Don't have to worry about that position for the next 3-4 years. And it really, really helps them kind of round out that offensive line. So there's just so many interesting players. The defensive linemen, just kind of hard-nosed, lunch pail guys. they need to get bigger up front. I don't know if that's going to happen in free agency or if that's going to be in this draft, but there are different ways. But again, I can't watch that team play the way they played in the trenches last year. This has to be the focus. It doesn't have to be the focus of pick 5. It has to be the focus of their draft, regardless, because we can't watch that Carolina or that Raider game again. Those games just ate the life out of me as a football fan.
I would be really pumped with a Michael Mayer pick. I think that's exact. People will quibble about, well, he's not quick enough. I mean, there was talk before the combine that he might run in the 4.8s. He ran a 4.70, which is perfectly acceptable for a tight end. I think when Will Disley ran a 4.83, I think for a 4.84, like a 4.70 is perfectly acceptable for a tight end. He's a good player, as you mentioned, Jeff, really good player. And, it's not that long ago that Zach Miller had a really, really good career with the Seahawks. He ran a 4.89 and he ran a slower 10-yard split. Michael Mayer had a 1.66. Zach Miller had a 1.69 split. And, that for me, he's a really, really good player. So yeah, I think Michael Mayer will be a fantastic fit for the Seahawks, and I think that is a good comparison. Just to get through a couple of super chats, Jeff's just going to join us back again in a second. This one from GR152K: Lamar to Seattle Commanders. Lamar to Seattle Commanders, Falcons, Panthers not interested. With a great respect, I don't think there's any chance that Lamar Jackson's going to end up in Seattle. The idea of them spending they've not paid Geno Smith to then go and pay Lamar Jackson is the guaranteed contract he wants. I think he's going to end up at the Commanders. It's going to be Daniel Snyder's FU to the league that he's going to sign Lamar Jackson on a fully guaranteed contract just before he sells the team and piss all the other owners off. I think that's what Dan Snyder's going to do, and I think that's why Eric Bieniemy's gone there. I think he's not gone there to coach Sam Howell. He's gone there to coach him like Lamar Jackson. So I think that's what the Reds, nearly said it, the Commanders are going to do. Jonathan says, Rob's trade-up proposal really grew on me. I mean, look, we've been throwing it. It's not so much a proposal as we just had a conversation about it. I'm sure that's something that Jeff and I will get onto, but appreciate the super chats. Jeff is back with us. I was just saying, Jeff, I don't know if you caught it. For me, Michael Mayer, I don't care that he can't separate brilliantly over the middle. I don't feel like I need a Travis Kelce clone to play tight end for the Seahawks. Zach Miller ran a far slower 40, ran a 4.89 compared to a 4.70. He had a horrible 10-yard split. Zach Miller did a great job for the Seahawks for, sort of 3 or 4 years as a free agent signing. Tough, physical, gets the job done, gets you a key third down. I will be completely happy with Michael Mayer. I'm completely on board with you on that one. And I think a lot of people would be like, what, a tight end at 20 if you take it? But I'd be punching the air. It'd be absolutely fantastic, that. Right, I want to talk about the top 5 and keep your super chats coming in if you do have any other further questions. Top 5. I've been looking at all sorts. I saw Colin Coward gave his top 5 projection today as he was talking about the Seahawks. I've been seeing Todd McShay's mock draft. There's been a couple of other mocks that have come out, Jeff, because the combine's now over. So give me your best guess. I've got mine written down here. What's your best guess for how this top 5 is going to play out as we sit here on March the 7th?
So right now, I've been thinking about this for a while. I think Carolina's going to move up to number 1. Not getting Carr and them really not being interested in Carr to me is a tell. And the GM of the Bears spoke on record with Peter King yesterday, and he's comfortable moving down a little further than people might think. So I think they move up to 1. I think it's for CJ Stroud. I know Josh McCown did some videos before he got hired, and he was just raving about. He's their new quarterback coach in Carolina. He was just raving about him. And
can I just say that it was amazing that whoever made those videos put them up as Josh McCown's view, and then edited the video to new Panthers coach Josh McCown gives his view, and then they took them all down like about 2 hours later because the Panthers had gone, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. So I saw some of those. And just Frank Reich, I think they're going to want, just like watching CJ Stroud throw last week. Yeah, that was incredible. So I think that's number 1. The number 2 pick, I think Houston takes Bryce Young. I think them playing in a dome is a big deal for Bryce Young. I think if you were to put Bryce Young in Chicago in that weather, that would worry me a little bit. And I know like some of the Houston guys come from New England. There's a lot of Alabama connections there. I'll stick with that. I'm going to go with Will Anderson at 3. Then number 4, I think the Colts are going to surprise people. I think they're going to take Will Levis. I think Chris Ballard likes that big physical kind of, and we've seen some of the guys they've invested. They had Carson Wentz a couple years ago. Will Levis is a guy I could just see Chris Ballard liking. And I think if Seattle comes through, I think Seattle's going to take Anthony Richardson. I think the Geno thing is just, I think it's a perfect match. Levis and Richardson in this scenario might flip. But to me, if I'm sitting there and it's Tyree Wilson or Anthony Richardson, like, I think you got to take Anthony Richardson in that spot. I think the whole Geno thing, and I just can't get this thought out of my head, and maybe I'm crazy for thinking he might even slip to 5, but the idea of like Anthony Richardson with DK Metcalf is like the freakiest quarterback receiver combination we've probably ever seen, with Kenneth Walker and with some of the other things they can do in this draft now with that offensive line. Like, that really has the makings of like a special kind of unit. And maybe it'll end up being Will Levis. Will Levis is just such an interesting projection, but I'm going to say Richardson for now. You think he's going to last to 5?
It's a good question. So I think immediately after the combine, everyone thought he was going to be the number 1 overall pick. And I saw Rich Eisen talking about that. And I was sort of thinking to myself, you know what, I could see it. But I'll answer the question by giving you my 5. I agree with you completely. I've got a mock draft ready to go. And Carolina are picking 1st overall. They are going to be aggressive. David Tepper, the owner, is very hands-on. And he said a few years ago, I don't want any old quarterback. I want special. And I think when he'll have watched that combine and watched CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson and thought those 2 guys are special. And Stroud in particular threw the ball so well. He threw it downfield probably as well as the other 2 guys, frankly. His deep throw was not that far off in terms of velocity. And I think they'll trade up for CJ Stroud and he will be the number 1 overall pick. So I agree with you completely. I think that Frank Reich, it's a quarterback I can imagine Frank Reich liking and David Tepper liking and being on board with that. And although Scott Fitter is the GM, I was told last year, basically he had no control. Matt Rule made all the decisions. I doubt that's changed now that they brought in a big name like Frank Reich. So I think Reich and Tepper will make the call and it'll be CJ Stroud and they will trade up with a haul. And I think they'll be prepared to give the Bears whatever they want because they've got a defense, they've got an offensive line, and I think they feel like they just need the quarterback now. So I'm going with Carolina number 1. I think the Texans are really interesting, Jeff, because I was just reading something the other day and someone just floated the idea of like, just don't assume they go quarterback. Now, I think that the chances are they will. But I just wonder, DeMeco Ryans knows the benefit of a great D-line. This is a team with the Texans that might feel like, can we go and get... Look, they've got the Patriots DNA, haven't they? And what do the Patriots do? They take quarterbacks a bit later on. And would they go, right, we can get Jimmy Garoppolo and bring him in as a bridge. We can draft Will Anderson, help DeMeco's D-line. Do we go and get Hendon Hooker? Do we go and get Stetson Bennett? Stetson Bennett, to me, reminds me a lot of the Garoppolo type. And I can imagine Stetson Bennett working in a Shanahan offense because he is athletic, but he executes. He executed the offense at Georgia. And I thought Stetson Bennett had a good combine. I thought he looked like he was throwing it very well. He's small, but he's a bit like Dorian Thompson-Robinson. He's actually got a bit about him, physically. So I'd probably go with Bryce Young, like you, because that's what everyone's saying. It's going to be Stroud and Young are the top 2. I wouldn't completely rule out Will Anderson and then go in later on with a quarterback, though. I just wonder, because Will Anderson's going to have wowed a lot of people with the way he talks. He is for me, a once in a, people say a generation. He's almost like a generational interview. He's fantastic. He's he talks with such maturity and passion and aggression for the game. It's incredible. So I think Anderson or quarterback. I think the Cardinals will take Will Anderson if he's there, without a shadow of a doubt. But your point on Tyree Wilson is legit. And if Anderson goes 2, could Wilson go 3? Possibly.
Yeah.
I think with the Colts, what do you think about this? I'm with you on the Colts staying at 4. I think that it's gone from feeling like they're the team that's going to trade up to now probably Chris Ballard saying to Jim Irsay, look, we don't need to move up. You know, Chris Ballard loves picks. He's a get more picks kind of guy. He's not in the let's trade all of our picks away kind of guy. I know he traded for Matt Ryan and for Carson Wentz. That was for a quarterback. I just feel like he's going to say we don't need to give up our first round picks for the next 2 years. There's 4 quarterbacks in the draft. Let's see who's there at number 4. And I think Jim Irsay will go okay. And I could well imagine him liking Will Levis. I could well imagine the owner's already said he likes Bryce Young on the record. So if he was still there, that's an option. And I could imagine either of those two being there. And then it comes down to see, I think this is the choice they're going to be presented with, Jeff. I think it will be Levis, Richardson, or Tyree Wilson. I think they're the 3 players that they're going to be presented with. And I'd have no issue. I know people go, well, Will Levis is 24. I don't have any issue giving him a red shirt year just because he's 24. Who cares? Geno Smith's 33 this year, and we've just seen a renaissance age 32. I don't have a problem with Will Levis's age. I think a red shirt year for any quarterback is a benefit. I think it's a good thing. So I have no issue with that. But there is just something about Anthony Richardson that's just the thought of him and DK and Ken Walker on the same field. How do you defend that? That's asking questions of every opponent. You want to be excited as a fan, don't you, Jeff? You want to tune in on a Sunday thinking, what am I going to see here? What's going to happen? And with those 3 on the field, that'd be a show. That'd be a real show. So I think if Levis is there, I think John's going to take him. But if Richardson's there, I think they'll take him. I don't know. How do you balance it? I'm leaning quarterback right now, Jeff. I don't know how you're leaning because you talk to different people. You've got your own views there. I'm leaning quarterback right now. If given either choice, you know, whether it's Wilson or Levis or Richardson, which way are you leaning?
I'm also leaning quarterback. I think if Will Anderson's there, I think it's very likely they take him. I think he might be their highest graded player in the draft. Now the Jalen Carter thing has kind of completely transformed this top 5. I think their evaluation on Jalen Carter completely changes their entire strategy. I'm with you. If they've been emphasizing character as much as they have, it's hard to imagine them, especially with their Malik McDowell and Percy Harvin scars, going after him. If you're comfortable with him, then it's different. But I just can't see it right now. And to me, I think it's Levis or Richardson, and they fit the character, they fit the value, they fit the team. They really balance out Geno Smith really, really well. And Tyree Wilson, I think he's a pretty solid prospect. Like his arm length and his ability, he has crazy potential. The thing I can't kind of square my head around still is where does he fit in this 3-4 defense? What position? Because he's not really the edge rusher who you want dropping in coverage. And he's not really the guy you want to be the 3-4 end who's 2-gapping. You want him moving forward, and you want him using those arms to kind of blow up the quarterback. And remember Carlos Dunlap in this defense. He was kind of a misfit. And he was still a valuable player for the Seahawks in the last year they had him. But one of the reasons they moved on is they didn't think he fit. In a 4-3 defense, he was a prototypical end. So I'm still trying to square my head around that, and I can't really come up with a good answer for that. And that's why I think when you look at the value and you look at the positional, like if there was another defensive end or Micah Parsons in this draft, sure, maybe you look there. But when I keep playing these scenarios in my head, I keep thinking, like, if I pass on Anthony Richardson for Tyree Wilson and Anthony Richardson hits, like, that's the kind of decision that can get you fired. So I don't know if every time I play with these mock draft simulators, I keep thinking, like, okay, I got to take Richardson or I got to take Levis. And I think that's what Schneider's going to end up doing.
Because I think in this scheme, Jeff, you need your 5 technique, that kind of player. Your 3-4 defensive end needs to be 285, 290. Tyree Wilson's 271 pounds. And that's not, I'm losing weight to run a great 40, because he didn't run a 40, he didn't do anything. So there was no reason for him to lose weight to be at the combine. He's gone to the combine. He is 271 pounds. And you're exactly right. He's not a coverage dropper. And I don't think it wouldn't be best for him to play him as a 3-4 defensive end. And look, I always call people out, Jeff, who sort of go down this kind of like, I don't want to draft a player from this team because previous players who are completely unrelated to them busted. I always think that's a bit of a cop-out, that, you've got to give more of a reason why you don't want to draft someone. But at the same time, I've seen the Seahawks spend 2 first-round picks on 2 older Big 12 defenders in the last few years, LJ Collier and Jordan Brooks, and neither picks really not really been that great. I mean, obviously Collier's not been great at all. I still think Jordan Brooks is okay. I don't think they've not smashed that one out the park. And Jordan Brooks was 23 when he came into the league. Tyree Wilson's going to be 23, 24 when he comes into the league. LJ Collier was 25, I think. So I've kind of seen this, been there, done that. I'm not that crazy. And I just, as intriguing as Wilson is, and let's see how he tests, I don't know. I'd be a bit underwhelmed if that was it. If that was the pick and you're thinking, okay, well, they're just adding to the D-line here. And what I'd personally rather see, Jeff, is I think those 3-4 defensive end positions, which I think is what Seattle really needs. I think they need somebody to protect that second level, to get those. Like, you've got your pass, you've got some edge rushers. Just make sure you fit the run. You've got your run fits in there. And you don't need to have flashy players doing that. Just go and get somebody who can create a little bit of disruption, but basically play solid football in free agency. And, whether it's Ashawn Robinson, he's just a run blocker. Just go get him in there. He is what he is, ex-Alabama, been around the block, can do you a job next to Al Woods. Go and get something like that. Go and have a dabble with Zach Allen at Arizona. Who wants to sign for Arizona? He's not been franchised. They can't make him stay. So either make them pay too much for him, or get him in Seattle and stick him out there. He can get you 6 sacks at defensive end in this scheme. He can hold down his role. He can do you a job. He's got the size. He's got the length. He's got the agility you look for. They're the kind of players that John Kaminsky's at Detroit's another one. They're the kind of players that just get him in there, Jeff. Solid role players for your 3-4 defensive end. Go and draft one as well in day 2 or something like that, or top of day 3. And that's how I want to see them begin to fix this defense. And, that's what I want them to do. And I think that frees you up if you do get a Zach Allen and an Ashawn Robinson, or if it's either or. I think it, again, like the Geno Smith thing, frees you up to be a bit flexible at number 5. And I think you're probably right. Will Anderson, I can just imagine Pete loving someone like that. 245, quick, amazing character. I can imagine that, but I just don't think he's going to be there. So I think you then move on to the quarterbacks and you invest in a quarterback for the future. And I think they've been very careful, haven't they, today, to stress that, like Pete Carroll did in an interview, he stressed that was still an option, almost like preparing people that this might happen, just in case, be ready for it. So I think that's probably the way they will go. I'm conscious of time, and I wanted to ask you about free agency. So what would your plan be? Let's say that's sort of their idea. It's Will Anderson or a quarterback. What are you going in? You're going into free agency next week. What kind of names float your boat? Who are you looking to target there?
For me, it's the defensive line, and it's the exact kind of players you're talking about. I don't think they need the guys who are going to make 14. Like Draymond Jones is going to make like $15 million. He's obviously a good player. He's the right age, but that's not who I think we need in this defense. If you watch like the Steelers historically play in the 3-4, or the Ravens when they started doing it with Rex Ryan years ago, and the Jets when he was there, like historically they don't have a lot of first round top 10 players as those 3-4. And like I remember Aaron Smith from the Steelers, and he was just that mauler guy, who can just play in the 3-4 and get your job done. It frees up everything for everyone else. And that's my number one priority in free agency. It's Cam Hayward's a guy, like I think Pittsburgh drafted in the 20s, and he's just been a staple in that defense. And he's become a better pass rusher over time, but that's not the job he was. He was just messed to like maul in the run game and blow up kind of plays. They need guys like that. So Zach Allen to me is the number one guy I'd be looking at. I don't know if he'll be in their price range because it's kind of a shitty free agency class in general, especially now that the tagged guys have come out, and there's not a lot of like front end guys that, and the Seahawks aren't going to spend that money anyway. They don't have room for it. So I'd be looking at like a Greg Gaines, Ashawn Robinson, I think is a really interesting one. Just guys to do the dirty work, because defensive linemen, especially those positions, it's not always easy for rookies to come in and be that physical dominant. It takes time. So if you can kind of get those big, strong players up front in free agency, I think that really allows you to kind of focus on getting the best players in the draft and not try to reach for positions. And I think they need to, when you watch them play in the trenches last year, they were just weak. Tuna Ford is a guy who's had a good career in Seattle, but he's not a fit if you want to play that style of defense. Shelby Harris is more of a penetrator. Same with Clinton Jefferson. They're not that guy who are going to blow up blocks. And you saw Jordan Brooks. He really struggled last year because he wasn't in a scenario where he was being helped out, and he's been questionable in general. But like, you need those guys to kind of blow up the run game, and they got pushed off the ball a lot. So I'd be looking at the kind of the three guys you mentioned, and the other spot I'd be looking at is linebacker. It's one of the strengths of this free agent class is linebacker. It's not the best draft year for linebackers, and they essentially need two of them because Brooks is going to be out. He might miss the whole season. Cody Barton, I would not re-sign unless it was dirt cheap. I wouldn't want to re-sign him anyway. I think they should shoot a little higher. So there's a lot in free agency. It's actually one of the deeper spots other than running back, which they probably don't need there. But linebacker, there's some guys who I think you could follow right into their like sweet spot. I've heard that Bobby wants to come back. I don't know if the money will work. I wouldn't sign him. I like getting free agents like they did with Chenna last year. I think you want to buy 25 to 27-year-old players that are on the way up. I don't think you want to pay for previous names. There are some guys that I would consider looking at, and I know there's a handful of linebackers. Like one of the guys I kind of liked, but I saw one of his price points, like Bobby Okereke from the Colts. I read he might get $12 to $14 million a year. Again, speaking to like the lack of quality in general. So the Bears have $100 million. They're going to sign a lot of these guys, but like even like Leighton Vander Esch, he signed like a 1 year, $2 million deal last year. There's guys like that where you can kind of Alex Singleton from the Broncos last year had a good year. And I'd be looking at signing one linebacker and then a couple defensive linemen, which allows you to go into the draft with a fresh approach. You're not chasing guys, and you can sit at 20. And if you want to trade down, you can trade down. If you want to pick a guy 20, if you want to pick a tight end that's more of a luxury position, go ahead. You want to be stuck in chasing. We need to draft Mazzie Smith here, and we might pass other guys. You don't want to be in that spot. So I think Pete's talked about today, they're kind of changing their looks on personnel. I didn't really know what that meant. I don't know if that means they're sticking to what they did last year, or last year they played almost 3 defenses. So they really need to kind of stick with what they want to do. A lot of the stuff Sean Desai was doing was some schematic stuff they did in Chicago. So I think free agency will be a tell of what they want to do. I don't think they're going to be big spenders because that's just not in their DNA. I wish they approached free agency a little differently, especially after seeing what Uchenna did last year. But I just don't expect it. So I think they'll pick and they'll get some veteran defensive linemen, probably in the second tier, maybe the third tier. And I hope they just pick guys that can open up the rest of the draft for them where they're not stuck chasing a spot.
Yeah, I think the linebacker that really intrigues me is Cole Holcomb at Washington, because he is 27 in July. He's 240 pounds. He is loved in Washington. They love what he does. He brings it every game. He was playing really, really well last season, and then he got an injury. And I think it wasn't a really bad injury or anything, but it was a niggling one. I think it was something like a wrist or something like that that kept him out for a long time, and they shut him down. Former 5th round pick, ascending player, ran a 4.51 40 at his combine, which is, really good for a 240 pound player. 4.14 short shuttle, which is exactly the kind of ballpark that Seattle has drafted linebackers in the past. He sports a pretty crazy mullet, which I quite like. And I just think he is the kind of player that you're talking about there, Jeff. Good age, ascending, right kind of price, can come in and do a job for you. And I just want to take a chance on somebody like that. And then you let the market, let a Bobby market, go and get somebody like that. Let the Bobby market come to you, really. If he goes out there and nobody's offering him a great contract and he's willing to come in and play on a team-friendly deal, whatever that is, then I'm more open-minded to it. But I don't know. Like the fear that I have, Jeff, is that if you go and sign Bobby Wagner and you've got Geno Smith and you've got Bobby Wagner back, I feel like we're back in 2019 here. Like you're paying a veteran quarterback and you've got Bobby Wagner back and you're hoping that they're going to lead you on. We've kind of seen that song and dance. I'd rather go in a different direction. So at the right price, fine with Bobby. I don't want to spend big money there. I want to look at the D-line first. Then I want to look at someone like Cole Holcomb. If he's then available and you can stick him next to Holcomb, great. If not, go and get somebody else. I mean, like Eric Kendricks is a free agent. He's 31. Could he do you a job for a year? Maybe. I kind of prefer young and fast these days, Jeff, at linebacker rather than aging and on the way out. But, they had his brother Michael in Seattle for a long time. Maybe he puts in a good word. I'm not sure. But I'm not really one for sentimentality. And I think obviously there's a lot of that. But a lot of Seahawks fans are obviously very keen on Bobby Wagner coming back. If there are any last super chats, get them in, and I'll run through those to finish. But so we've kind of had a good go through there with the free agency, and I wanted to kind of end with this Jalen Carter situation, Jeff, because I find it quite interesting. And when the news came out right at the start of the combine, you're wondering what impact's this going to have. And my initial thought was, well, that's it, because if he's going to be in serious trouble here, then he's not going to be drafted. If it's not resolved before the draft, he's not going to be drafted. Then it comes out it's just a couple of misdemeanors. Somebody got in touch with me who's a lawyer and said, well, as it happens in law in Georgia, that could be upgraded to something more serious, depending on how the case goes. Then it could become quite an issue for him, but that hasn't happened yet. Of course, this is a situation that has to play out. I think there's some date in the middle of April, which is quite important. Whether or not they want to, as sad as this sounds, really throw the bucket and ruin a football player from Georgia's career or not, who knows? I don't know if there's some kind of political aspect to that. Certainly when he was pulled over shortly before this happened, there's an article came out, it was pulled over by the police. The policeman, I think in that article, was saying, I don't want to get you in trouble here, really, because you play for Georgia. So let's see what happens with all of that. But then in seeing mock drafts, Jeff, like I saw one today, Lance Zierlein put Jalen Carter at number 5 to Seattle. Todd McShay had Jalen Carter going to Arizona at number 3. Now, I don't think a first-time GM wants to make that pick in Arizona. I just don't think that's the direction they're going to go. But it's interesting, isn't it? So he could still go quite early. I don't think he's going to be on Seattle's board. They've talked about so much of an emphasis on character being so crucial to their draft last year. I just cannot imagine any way that they take him after all of this. But could he still go in the top 10? Is he going to last to someone like the Cowboys, who, they signed Randy Gregory back in the day, so they'll pretty much do anything. Does he last like that? Does he fall completely like La'el Collins? What do you think? What's your read on this?
It's a hard situation to have a read on. I think there's going to be a lot of – listen, people always wonder, what are teams doing right now? The draft's not for 2 months, essentially, or a month and a half. And I think a team like Seattle is going to – their team's going to spend a lot of time on Jalen Carter in the next 6 weeks, next 7 weeks. I think a team like Atlanta, who's from Georgia, like there's been reports saying they'll take him if he's there. So I think these next couple of weeks are going to be massive for teams to kind of go back, do some digging. They all have their own private security teams. There were a lot of teams, like this isn't a new thing. Like you were ahead of the curve on that kind of evaluation, but Albert Breer came out and kind of had some quotes a lot before that. And there was a lot of questions I've heard about Jalen Carter myself. So I think every team's going to be remarkably different. I saw Mike Sando put out his top 10 talking to executives, and Carter was not in the top 10. So I think he's going to end up getting taken because of just this draft, and someone's going to roll the dice. I can see Atlanta doing that. But historically the Raiders, but now they're run by New England people. I don't see that as much. But yeah, I think someone's going to take him. I just don't think right now it's going to be in the top 5. I think it could be the Bears. I think the Bears could end up taking them if they move down to 9. I think it could be Atlanta, but man, it's hard to think of Seattle and the Malik McDowell thing and how much the butterfly effect of that pick caused problems for them. They traded for Sheldon Richardson, all these kinds of things, but they just blew that evaluation, and they were too arrogant, I think is the word. They were too arrogant that Pete Carroll or their support system could fix what was obvious to a lot of teams. And I think with a top 5 pick, that if you miss on that top 5 pick and it's due to someone not showing up, and we saw Percy Harvin, what happened with him in Seattle. Same sort of, and Jamal Adams, you can make a case. has just not been like maybe I should have done more work into his character. And obviously he's got some different kind of character. So he's not a criminal or anything like that. But looking back, like, is he the guy you want to spend 2 first-round picks on? Well, knowing now it's obvious no, but like they've been burned in those kind of situations, and like, I just can't see it. And Arizona, again, they're making their first pick as a regime, and they got a bad rap right now. Kyler Murray, that survey that just came out, like, God, that's a bold pick. So maybe a team like Detroit can roll the dice. They built up a lot of goodwill in the last couple of years. Atlanta as a team, they kind of lack an identity on defense. He's a local guy, but like there's not a lot of spots. So I think he's going to end up going the first round still, unless something else comes out criminally. And we've seen it with Tunsil and Warren Sapp, and historically, and these Randy Moss, they all get picked in the first round. They're that good. Carter is that good, but Seattle, I'm just struggling to see it. I can't see it.
Same with some final super chats. Blitzy says, thanks very much for the great discussion. I always enjoy it. Thank you, Blitzy, for your support. Always a big support of the channel. Cody says, thoughts on Jermaine Pratt, my number 1 FA free agent target. Thoughts on Jermaine Pratt, Jeff?
I really like him. I'm a little worried he's going to be priced out of the range. I think he is exactly the kind of, he's a good coverage linebacker. He's got like a physical profile. He's got a personality. He's been a good player, but I think, again, the lack of quality available in this market, I think Pratt's going to end up potentially over $10 million a year annual. And I don't see Seattle spending that on a linebacker.
And then the final one is from the Snail. What do you think about bringing Shaq back? So you mean Shaquille Griffin? Obviously, it's quite an off-season because Bobby Wagner, Frank Clark, and Shaquille Griffin are all available. So if you did want to go back to 2018, that would be very possible on defense. But do you see any? I mean, we've talked about Wagner, Clark, Shaquille Griffin. Do you see any of these guys coming back, Jeff, potentially?
I could see Clark of the 3. I think they made a mistake there, and they're still paying for it. Shaquille Griffin does not excite me in the least. I don't think there's a huge difference in play between him and Michael Jackson. And I think Michael Jackson's not going to cost very much. Trey Brown's still sitting there, too. I'd rather play Trey Brown, to be honest, than Shaquille Griffin. Like, one of the biggest fears I had 3 or 4 years ago was that they were going to pay for Shaquille Griffin over $10 million a year. I think they were in that negotiation. Shaquille Griffin's the exact kind of player like Jaron Reed was, that you don't pay in free agency. It's the kind of guy, he was a good, fine player, had one really good year, but he's like a cornerback that didn't have ball skills. And now he's got back issues. He was out most of the year. He's probably slower. Cornerbacks fall off a cliff very quickly. You want to get cornerbacks when they're young and when they're healthy. And there's not a lot of guys that their games can age like Sherman's did because of how smart he was. If you take away some of Shaq Griffin's athleticism, he is not an intriguing player. And to me, he's not what they need. If you're going to draft a corner in the draft, like, I can get around that. You can get a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round, sure. But I don't want a 27-year-old guy with back issues that didn't make any impact on Jacksonville. They made the right decision letting him go. And that was one of the more predictable free agent failures that did not work out.
There's such a deep cornerback class as well. I'd almost rather just add one of those. I mean, look, Julius Brents is. I mean, I'd go and check out the interview. Anybody, if you've not seen it on the channel, there's an interview with him. There's an interview with Adetomore Adi, and there's an interview with Juice Scruggs, the center, and more where that came from as well. But check out Julius Brents is just wow. What a character, what a person. And he, looks up to Richard Sherman, says that's the kind of player he compares to. So wouldn't be a bad pick there. Jeff, always a pleasure. Absolutely fantastic. Hundreds of people watching live. Always great to have you on. And I hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, man. I wish it was April. Like, I am dying for this draft. It's a long wait. We got a long time.
The worst bit's coming because free agency is quite interesting. And then it dies down and you think that's that over. And then just have this long, boring bit where nothing happens.
It should be the end of March.
It should be the end of March. I completely agree. Get free agency out of the way, get on with the draft, and then just let everybody go on holiday for 2 or 3. These coaches, it's not even the players, it's the coaches and the scouts. They need to have a break. If you just bunched it up a bit quicker, then we could all get on with it and we could all enjoy it a bit more. Jeff, love having you on again. Like I say, I hope we can do this again very soon because always great to have you on. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like and share the video. Leave a comment in the comments section afterwards for the algorithm, and at SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis in the future. Until next time, bye for now.